Hello, everyone. My name is Sharnice Peters, and I am a program analyst for the Division of Energy Assistance with the Office of Community Services. On behalf of OCS, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar that will provide a 60-minute review of the FY 2022 Performance Data Form Module 1, the Grantee Survey. Today's webinar will be presented by Melissa Torgerson from Verb Associates and Dan Bausch from Apprise. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will focus on the reporting requirements of the FY22 Grantee Survey. The purposes of this webinar are to review the key requirements for completing the Grantee Survey module of the FY22 LIHEAP Performance Data Form, aka Module 1, to explain changes to the FY22 Grantee Survey since last year, to explain the approach for reporting on supplemental funds, including the LIHEAP American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funds, and LIHEAP Infrastructure Act funds, to highlight key reminders and ways to avoid common reporting issues, and to review examples of different reporting scenarios. The audience for today's webinar includes new and experienced state LIHEAP coordinators, as well as fiscal and program staff that assist with completing the Grantee Survey. We greatly appreciate you joining us today, and we hope that this webinar is helpful as you complete your FY22 Performance Data Form. With that, Dan, please take it away.
Thanks, Sharnice. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Bausch. I'm a project director at Apprise. Thank you for joining us today for the training. So today's webinar is going to be an hour long. In the GoToWebinar box that should be on your screen on the side or on the top, there are two handouts. There's a copy of the slides we're going to go through and a spreadsheet template version of the performance data form that you can also download. Today's webinar is going to be recorded for the ACF YouTube channel, and we are repeating this webinar in January, same content, same presentation for anyone who wasn't able to attend this one and would like to. So that's January 5th. You don't need to attend both. All right, so we do take questions during the webinar. We have a period at the end of the webinar where we try to answer questions. So if you have a question, there's a question box. You can type it in during the webinar. And Nicholas, who's running the slides, will have all the questions, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end, and then follow up with you by email if we don't get to your question. So please ask questions. This is the outline for today's webinar. This is just helpful when you download the slides to find what you're looking for. We are focused on the Grantee Survey today. We'll have a few reminders at the end as well on the performance measures. All right, we're going to start with a poll question to find out how experienced you are with working on the Grantee Survey. Is it a new thing for you that you haven't worked on at all? Have you worked on it for the last year or two? Are you a little bit more experienced with 3 to 4 years, or have you worked on it for more than 5 years? These polls just help us to get a sense of the audience, and we'll have one at the end as well. So if you could take some time to answer the poll question. All right, we'll give it another few seconds here. All right, I think we can go ahead and close it. All right, so this is similar to the household report webinar. We have a mix of people with different experience levels. A lot of people are fairly new to the report, so that's good for us to know and keep in mind. All right. So we wanted to start just with a reminder of what the Grantee Survey is and where it fits into the framework of LIHEAP data and LIHEAP reports that you submit to HHS. So the Grantee Survey a long time ago was its own report. Now it is one part of a larger report called the LIHEAP Performance Data Form. The LIHEAP Performance Data Form has been around now since 2015, 2016, and that includes 2 different reports or modules that you have to submit each year. There's the Grantee Survey that we're talking about today, and then there's the performance measures. There's a 3rd optional module, but that's not required, and we're not going to cover that in depth in the performance measures training. So module 1 and 2, the thing that's important here is that they're both in the same report, in the same spreadsheet, but they are really separate reports in terms of what information they're asking you for and the procedures that you would need to complete each module. So as a lot of you know, you may have one person or multiple people working on the performance measures, and then you might have fiscal people you're working with on the Grantee Survey. Okay, so zeroing in on the Grantee Survey, this has been around a long time for HHS because it collects really valuable, important information about how grant recipients are obligating and using their LIHEAP dollars. And it's focused on the funds you had available in the prior fiscal year for obligation and how those funds were obligated or were carried over. So there's 3 types of data that the Grantee Survey focuses on, and each of these 3, they're not exactly one-to-one related. The first one is the amount of funds obligated for each funding source and type of assistance. So X dollars to heating assistance with regular funds. That's how we obligated them for use. The second item is more coming from your program data and is focused on what is the average LIHEAP benefit amount that a household received for that type of assistance and with that funding source. So for the heating assistance that was provided with regular funds in federal fiscal year 2022, what was the average heating assistance benefit a household got with regular funds? And then number 3 is to understand the income limits that grant recipients are setting based on your income eligibility criteria. You're asked to report the dollar maximum income limit for a 4-person household as well. So those are the 3 main elements that you'll be reporting in the Grantee Survey. It is important to note that the Grantee Survey is not an audit report. It's not a detailed financial report looking at how everything was expended. It's a snapshot of how funds were obligated or designated and the average benefits and the income eligibility criteria you're setting. The data are used from the Grantee Survey. They're used in the data warehouse, in the report to Congress. They're used when there's inquiries about the LIHEAP program or considerations of changes. And they're really useful for you if you want to look at another state and get a sense of how other states are obligating their funds or the benefit levels they're providing. You can do that with the data from the Grantee Survey. There's an example here in the box. This is from the LIHEAP fact sheet that's on the OCS website. And this is from the Grantee Survey, the total amount of funding obligated for different types of assistance with regular LIHEAP dollars. So the Grantee Survey fits in with the other reports that you're asked to submit to HHS. We went over this for the household report training a bit, but the model plan says here's what you're going to do. The household report says here's the number of households that were served in the past federal fiscal year. And the Grantee Survey is saying here's how the funds we had available to use in the past fiscal year were obligated for different types of assistance or different components at admin, assurance 16, etc. Performance measures for Module 2 is the impact that LIHEAP had on energy burden or access to energy service in the past year. Then you have the new quarterly report that also asks for some obligation information on a quarterly basis, and the other financial reports, the SF425 and the carryover report. So together, these help really provide a good picture of what the LIHEAP program is doing at the grant recipient level. Okay, so for FY 2022, there have been some limited changes to the Grantee Survey that we're going to go over in this webinar. And these are due to the release of the new supplemental funding award beginning in FY 2022. So there have not been any radical or major changes to the form and what you're asked to submit, but some lines that were closed before that were reserved have been opened up for reporting on the new source of supplemental funds. You would still use the same procedures and approach you've used in the past to complete the report. The report looks the same as before, and we'll go over these changes and what they mean. Okay, so in 2021, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provided $500 million over 5 federal fiscal years for LIHEAP. HHS began awarding those funds in federal fiscal year 2022. Those funds had the same rules as regular LIHEAP block grant funds in terms of how you could obligate them. You needed to obligate 90% in the year you received them, and you could elect to carry over up to 10%. They can be used for the same purposes as other LIHEAP funds, and you can find the release information at this link. So because of the release of the Infrastructure Act funds, HHS has opened up lines in Section 4 of the Grantee Survey that were previously closed and hidden. Those lines are for you to report on how the Infrastructure Act funds were used, and they're in parts J to L of Section 4. It's the same format as the other funding sources in Section 4. And you don't need to report any separate information on the infrastructure funds or assistance with those funds for the household report or for the performance measures. But for reports, your financial reports like the SF425 or the Grantee Survey, you're asked to report some information on that source of funds. All right, so one other really important note is you're all operating now your programs in 2023 federal fiscal year. This report's focused on 2022. In 2022, you all have received a lot of different funding sources, but for filling out the Grantee Survey for 2022, all your CARES funds had to have been obligated by the end of 2021. So there's no reporting in this Grantee Survey on CARES funds or obligations of those funds since they had to have been obligated already. So that means for this 2022 report, there's 3 different types of funds you'd be reporting on. You'd be reporting on your regular LIHEAP funds that come from the block grant and reallotment, your ARPA funds, and the Infrastructure Act funds. Also, if you obligated all your ARPA funds in the first year you received them, 2021, then you also do not have any ARPA obligations to report in this report. So some of you may be reporting on each of these 3 items. Some of you might be reporting on just 2 of the 3. As in the past, OCS is expecting the report will be submitted on Basecamp with an Excel spreadsheet. So they'll be providing those spreadsheets in the next week, and each state gets their own spreadsheet that has information pre-populated about the funds you had available. So you'll be receiving that. And the current due date is set for January 31st. That had been the due date for historically for the report. It has been moved back to March or April in the past due to delays, but right now the date is set at January 31st, and there'll be more communication soon about the report or any adjustments to the date. So I think we're going to turn it to Melissa to go over some key concepts and reminders.
Yay! Welcome everyone. It's reporting season, and we're going to go over some, as Dan said, key concepts for reporting. This is especially good for new folks or experienced folks who just kind of want a refresher, as well as some reminders to help you as you move along through reporting. So the first key concept is that this is about the federal fiscal year 2022 reporting period. And so it's focused on activity from October 1st, 2021 to September 30th, 2022. Now, many of you operate your programs on a different calendar, for example, January 1st to December, or, you know, June through July, or July through June. But the federal government really doesn't care about that. The federal government cares about the federal fiscal year, which is this period. So you will need, for those of you who do run those differently timed programs, you might end up needing to pull information from portions of 2 different program years. Next slide. This is a really helpful chart. It's new, it's been put together, and I think this is one that you would maybe perhaps give to your IT staff or whoever might be putting together this report. This really kind of explains the major pieces of the Grantee Survey portion of the performance data form. So we talk first about the sources of funds. And this is, you know, all the funds that you're going to have available to obligate in 2022. This includes funds awarded by OCS and funds that you carried into 2022 from 2021. The uses of funds are how you divvy that money up. So this is about how you took all those funds that you reported in sources and obligated them out, or maybe even carried them into 2023. But we're interested to see how you allocated funds across different types and components. Another piece of this form is the maximum income section, and this is also in the uses section of the report. There's a separate kind of column of fields, and this is how you're going to tell us what the income eligibility was for each of your components. And we recognize that some of you use different eligibility requirements for different pieces of your program, for example, crisis or cooling, or you may have used different income eligibility thresholds for ARPA or your infrastructure funds. So just be cognizant that there's actually a field of a maximum cutoff dollar amount for each component, and you need to fill that out appropriately. And then also in the uses section are the average benefit amounts household received during federal fiscal year 2022. And this really needs to be calculated using the actual benefits that were provided during the reporting period. And so what you're seeing here, hopefully, is that this piece here at the end, this average benefit, isn't always going to align with what you obligated. Some of you obligate funds and don't expend them until the next year. But this average benefit piece, what we're really looking for is what you actually used and assisted households with in FY 2022. And a lot of grant recipients, because they're all kind of on the same line of the report, they expect all these different numbers to align, and that's not always the case. So it's just something to keep in mind, and we'll talk a little more about that. Next slide. So we're going to walk through each of these just a little bit. This is the uses of funds section that we were talking about. And the first piece that you're going to be filling out is this, what's highlighted in red, the first column, total funds and awards. And this is where you're going to put the amount of available funds that you obligated for each component. Now on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about obligations. Some of you have heard this. You can go ahead to the next slide. Some of you have heard this a lot, but it's very important as you're putting together this report, because this can really kind of even stump the most experienced coordinators. This report is focused on obligations, and that's not always the same thing as expenditures. The LIHEAP statute gives all of you flexibility in terms of deciding what obligation means. And so some examples might be approval letters issued to clients, contracts to your subgrantees where you award them the money or give them a notice of allocation, credit lines established with vendors, or contracts to perform IT services. There's a whole plethora of ways that different grant recipients define obligated, but you can see that it's not the same as expended. And so it's very important that as you are putting together this report, you're remembering that you're focused on the obligations, not expenditures. In some cases, especially during this last few years with a lot of extra funds, obligated funds aren't expended until after the end of the fiscal year. For example, some of you may have obligated funds to your subgrantees for heating assistance during the fiscal year, but your subgrantees may not get to spend them until the year after. And so we recognize that. And once again, you would be reporting in this form on what you obligated to those subgrantees, whether they spent it or not. Next slide. So carryover funds are not funds that you didn't spend. I know that's the first thing we think of is, well, this is the money that I didn't spend by the end of the year. But that is not what carryover funds are in LIHEAP. These are funds that you didn't obligate in the same fiscal year. So this means you didn't tie them up in a contract, you didn't obligate them to a subgrantee, however you define obligate. They're just monies that are sitting out there ready to be given out or committed. And so that's what carryover funds are. And there are a few different places where you have to talk about carryover funds in this report. The first is in section 3, which is sources. And this is where you're going to talk about those carryover funds from 2021 that you brought into 2022. So these are funds that were awarded to you in 2021, but that you did not obligate. You decided, you know what, I'm just going to bring those into 2022 and obligate them there. In section 4, uses, you're going to talk about the funds you didn't obligate during 2022 and that you're deciding to carry into 2023. So this is a lot, for those of you who are old enough to remember balancing a checkbook on paper, this is exactly what that is. It's an accounting of funds. What did you bring into the new month? In this case, it's a fiscal year. And what did you do with those monies, and what are you carrying out of the fiscal year? And that's what carryover is about. For the grantee survey, just so you know, you're going to see a lot of these tie-ins. The amount you report is being carried into 2023 needs to match the carryover report in your final carryover report, which is due December 30th. So these reports should align. If you say that we are carrying $10 million into 2023 of unobligated funds, we would expect that $10 million to also be reported in the final carryover and reallotment report that's due at the end of December. If it's not, there will be you'll be contacted to be asked about that discrepancy. So just be aware of that. If you need assistance in submitting a revision to your carryover and reallotment report, you get to this grantee survey and you realize, oh shoot, I put the wrong number on that report and now they don't align, contact Apprise and we'll help you do that. So this is a chart. I'm not going to go over it in great detail because we don't have a lot of time today, but I think this is really useful to first define what the carryover rules are for each funding type. That's the first column. For example, we know that with your regular LIHEAP, up to 10% of funds awarded in a federal fiscal year can be carried over unobligated into the next fiscal year. And then ARPA and infrastructure funds have different rules. And then these next two columns are how you account for these things in the report. So they're going to be, once again, in the sources section and the uses section. And in many cases, they're going to be pre-populated. So they're going to use numbers that were in your prior carryover reports in order to populate the sources section. You really need to check these and make sure they're accurate. And if they're not accurate, you may need to revise some past reports or give OCS or Prize a call. But this is really helpful for understanding how you would check the sources of funds in terms of carryover, but also report how you're going to carry over funds from 2022 into 2023. Next slide. So these are reminders, and once again, these are kind of checks that you should be thinking about as you're putting together the report, and then once again, as you're proofreading it. The first is that checkbook concept. There needs to be consistency between the amount of funds you see available for obligation and then the amount of funds you obligated. The two really should be equal. So this means that for each funding type, the total funding amounts in Section 3, the sources, should match the total amount in Section 4, the uses. We've also put some lines here that should match, and these are great if you're putting together a report to just kind of do your own little validation. So line 10 in Section 3, these are the subtotal of your regular LIHEAP funds, should match line 14 in Section 5, the total uses of funds that are not supplemental. And then your ARPA sources should match your ARPA uses, and your infrastructure sources should match your infrastructure uses. So these are handy little tips to highlight and use when you're proofreading your report. Next slide. This is an example of what you're going to see in the report. So this is going to be your sources section, and you see here that you're awarded this grant recipient was awarded $50 million in regular LIHEAP block grant funds for FY 2022. That's the first line. You also had $5 million in FY 2021 regular block grant funds that you carried over to obligate in 2022. So that source, as we mentioned, is going to be auto-populated, and you need to check that to make sure it's consistent with your past reports and your records. And what that means is that in line 10, you have a total regular funds available of $55 million. So now you're going to talk about how that $55 million was obligated, and that's the next slide. In the uses section, go ahead and go to the next slide. In Section 4, you're going to report how these funds were obligated, and it needs to add up to 55 million. So for example, this grant recipient had 20 million in heating assistance and 5 million in year-round crisis and 15 million in weatherization. And you can see how they've basically said, this is how we obligated these funds across different types. And at the end of the day, it equals out to the amount that we said we had coming in, 55 million. If there's a discrepancy, we're going to make one of two assumptions. We're going to assume that either you didn't do your math right and you'll get a call, or we're going to assume that you have money that needs to be returned to the federal government. So there's money, for example, that you carried over but forgot to obligate, and it won't fit anywhere. It won't fit in a line. There's no line that says I'm returning this to the federal government. So if there's a discrepancy, we're going to either make the assumption that there's some money you have to return and it didn't fit anywhere, or that you made a mathematical error. And so you should be making that assumption too when you proofread your report. So the next thing that this report asks for is average household benefits. And this refers to the average benefit issued to households during the fiscal year. This is what you actually assisted households with. If you go to the next slide, what this what this accounts for is the average benefit of all types of benefit provided under that type of assistance during the fiscal year. So for example, what this means is that some of you give out more than one heating benefit, for example, or more than one cooling benefit. And we would want you to sum those for each household before taking the average. So Dan's written out some instructions here. It's calculated by summing the benefit amounts across all households that receive the assistance and dividing it by the total number of households that receive the assistance. We're going to want you to separately calculate the average benefit amounts for regular LIHEAP, ARP, and Infrastructure Act funds. If the average household benefit includes benefits other than bill payment assistance, we want a description of the benefit type. So for a handful of states, you, for example, do furnace clean and tune, or you might do equipment repair as part of your regular heating assistance benefit. And so if you are counting those types of benefits in with bill payment assistance, we need you to put a note in the notes section. I want to underscore this. Can you go back to the previous slide? This is about the money you spent on households. So this is the one place where we're breaking the rules. You know, the whole report is focused on obligations, but not this column. This column is focused on actual expenditures. We want to know the average benefit, what you spent on average for each household in each component during the year. And it doesn't matter if those funds actually were obligated in 2021 or even previously. This is about what you spent on the household. And the fact that it's in the same line as this other obligation piece confuses a lot of grantees. They assume that the second column needs to line up with the first. But we know that sometimes you obligate funds and don't spend them right away. So just be aware that we understand that. Be aware that if you're looking for this perfect reconciliation across this line, you're not going to probably get it. These are different data points, and each field needs to be looked at differently. Okay, you can go to slide 28. The last piece of information we're going to ask you is for the maximum annual dollar income for a 4-person household as of the effective date, which is the reporting period. So for most people, this is going to be the income amount that was in effect at the beginning of FY 2022, which was October 1, 2021. So if you go to the next slide, it outlines this a little bit. We've given you a link to the poverty guidelines that were in effect at the beginning of 2022. If your program component began after the release of the 2022 poverty guidelines, for example, some of you have cooling programs, obviously, that start in June or July. You may have used the 2022 guidelines for your income thresholds, and you may report on these. Just please put a note in so that we understand that you're actually using the 2022 guidelines. And we understand that you're going to potentially use different income cutoffs for your heating or cooling or crisis, or with your different funding. So you may have used the same cutoffs for your regular LIHEAP funding, but for ARPA, you may have bumped them up or down. And so just make sure that you're not putting the same income threshold across all your types if that's not what you actually used. Pay attention to each type and make sure you write down the 4-person cutoff that was related directly to that type. Next. This is a tough one. Consistency with the household report. We are looking across all your reports to see that we see some consistency in how you're reporting. So in general, for many of you, when we look at your uses of LIHEAP funds across heating or cooling or crisis, we expect it to be consistent with the types of assistance you reported in your household report. So for example, each assistance you offered in FY 2022 to different households, we would expect you to see expect to see the total funds and awards funds that you obligated to that, the average household benefit, and the maximum annual dollar income threshold for those assistance types. But we do understand that we're looking at obligations versus expenditures, and you may have some types that some money that you obligated, but you didn't spend until the next year. So we understand there may be some inconsistencies between reports, and we really encourage you to write notes that explain that. Here's some examples. If you obligated $0 for a type of assistance reported in your household report, so you didn't obligate any money to heating in 2022, but you're reporting that you served 1 million households with heating in 2022, and chances are you're serving them with prior year obligated funds. It still looks like a discrepancy, so just make sure you put a note in there that says, I understand I'm saying 0 here and I'm reporting 1 million households here, and here's why. And vice versa. If you obligated funds for assistance in 2022, but you're not going to serve them until another year, you would want to make sure that you jot that down in the notes. Next. I've kind of already talked about this, but I can't say it enough. Those of you who are experienced know that you'll get calls from Apprise if there's any kind of question or discrepancy. We want to clear it up and make sure your report does the best job possible of telling your story. These go to Congress and are used for other purposes, and we want to make sure they're accurate and correct and clear. And so if we don't see a note that explains something strange to us, we're going to call you and ask questions. So I can't say enough. If there's anything that's weird or that you can't quite, that might look strange in a report, but you know to be accurate, make sure that you write a note. And there's some examples here for you to reference. And now Dan's going to talk about reporting on supplemental funds.
Yep. All right, so we talked about this already. With the household report, you're reporting on total households, the subset that got CARES, if any, and the subset that received assistance with ARPA. There is no separate reporting for Infrastructure Act funds in that report. In the Grantee Survey, because it's looking at how dollars were obligated, you are asked to report some separate information for the Infrastructure Act funds. There'll be no reporting on CARES because those all needed to be obligated before FY 2022. All right, so we talked about this already. So let's just go to the next slide. This is just a note that I just said. Here is what the Grantee Survey looks like for Section 4, the uses. This is where you report on your regular funds, non-supplemental funds. You go to the next slide. Here's where you report on your ARPA funds. You can see same layout, same design. And one more slide. Here's what it looks like for the Infrastructure Act funds. So it'll be the same layout, same design. All right, so how you used your different funding sources is something that's important to consider when you're doing the Grantee Survey. With the obligation of funds, you're really looking to fiscal records or fiscal staff to say, how did we designate this pot of funds to different categories to be able to report on that. So your FY22 regular funds, any ARPA funds you had carried into 2022, and the smaller amount of infrastructure funds you received. For average benefits, you're needing to look at your program records on the benefits households received, and if you kept funding sources separate, then you'd be able to look at that pretty easily. If you mixed funding sources, there's a little bit more of a challenge with that, but you're going to want to do your best to use your program records, the amount of funds you had available, and calculate the average benefit. For the maximum income, if your income eligibility criteria were the same across components, there's not you report the same number for all assistance types. If there was no difference between the funding sources, then you would just have the same amounts in the report across funding sources. So for heating assistance, if you use 150% of the federal poverty guidelines, even if you provided heating with a mix of funds, you'd still report that the same maximum income based on 150% of poverty for a 4-person household. It's important with the different funding sources and things that could be odd in the report to just remember to include those notes, as Melissa said. All right, let's look through some examples together, focusing in on the supplemental funds. So when we go to this next slide, the bottom portion of this slide, the left side is section 3 of the Grantee Survey, where you report on sources. The right side is section 4, where you report on how the available funds were obligated and used. And at the top of the slide, we're going to go through the scenarios. So for this grant recipient, this is an example of they prioritized the regular funds they got, and they decided to save some portion of the infrastructure fund. So for this grantee at the top, $25 million in regular funds they received, $5 million in Infrastructure Act funds for FY 2022, what they were awarded from HHS. So under section 3 for sources, we'll put the $25 million for regular funds that they were awarded, and we'll put $5 million for the infrastructure funds. Now those are the lines that get pre-populated for you in the spreadsheet, but you'll still want to check them. All right, so what decisions does grantee make to use those funds? For their regular funds, the $25 million, they obligated all of those funds during 2022 and decided to prioritize using those. So they didn't carry over any of those to 2023. So in section 4 on the right side in yellow or orange, we're going to put in the regular funds part of section 4, $25 million for the assistance types they offered. 0 on the carryover line for carryover to 2023. Now let's look at ARPA. So they obligated all of their ARPA funds before 2022. So under uses for ARPA, they're going to have $0 for all fields. And under sources on the left side in purple, we're also going to have, or in red, we're also going to have $0. They didn't have any ARPA funds that were remaining to be obligated in 2022. So it's $0 available, $0 obligated. Now we're going to look at the Infrastructure Act. So they didn't obligate any of their Infrastructure Act funds in this example. So we're going to put them all 5 million on line 43, and we're going to do the same thing then we're going to add up the totals for each section. And the total sources, 25 plus 5 is 30 million on the left. And then we're going to do the same thing on the right. And the spreadsheet helps do this for you. And that it also adds up to 30 million. So when you're checking your report to see if you've done it correctly, if you're missing anything, you want to see if those total sources equal those total uses. And again, this is just an made-up example here. All right, so we're going to look at another grant recipient. This one used some of their regular funds and some of their Infrastructure Act funds in 2022. This is going to be more common. Here's $30 million that they received in their award from HHS in regular funds, and $7 million in Infrastructure Act funds. So on the left side, again, under sources, we're going to put 30 million on the regular fund line, and there'll be 7 million on the infrastructure line. All right, how did they obligate these funds? Well, let's look at regular funds first. They decided to obligate 90% and to carry over the maximum amount of 10% to FY 2023. So 90% of the 30 million is 27 million that they've obligated. So they'll split that across the different assistance types or categories. And then they carried over 10%, which is 3 million. So that goes on the carryover line, line 7. When we look at ARPA, they had obligated all their ARPA funds already before 2022. So we'll have $0 again under section 4 and section 3 for ARPA. And then for infrastructure, they obligated a portion of their Infrastructure Act funds. So we'll see that under the infrastructure funds area. So when we add up the totals again, the total amount is 37 million for sources, 37 million for uses, and you can see that those are equal. All right, we'll do one more. This one also used ARPA during 2022, so we wanted to give an example of that. They had 20 million they were awarded in regular funds, 4 million in infrastructure. So again, we'll put the 20 under sources for regular funds and the 4 for infrastructure funds. For their regular funds, that 20 million, they obligated 90%. So under section 4, we're going to put 18 million across the assistance types and the 2 million that they carried over on the carryover line. For the ARPA, we're going to go to next. So even though they were awarded the ARPA funds in 2021, they saved $1 million of that by not obligating it and carrying it into 2022. So that 1 million is available as a source, and that's on the left-hand side under ARPA. Decided to obligate that to heating assistance. So we're going to put 1 million for heating assistance under ARPA on the right. And then Infrastructure Act, they obligated all their infrastructure funds during 2022. So we're going to put 4 million across the assistance types that where they obligated it to, and 0 for carryover to 2023. So total sources adds up to 25 million on the left, and on the right also adds up to 25 million for this example. Okay, next slide. All right, so data validation and checks. So the report has 2 features to try to help make it a little bit easier for you to complete. The one is those source funds from section 3 are pre-populated. So some fields that are not applicable have a value of 0, and those are locked. Your award amounts will be pre-populated based on HHS records. You should still check them, make sure that they align with what you're expecting. And the carryover lines are editable. So if you carried over some funds into 2022, they'll be pre-populated based on your earlier reports, but if you have an adjustment to make, those are editable. There's also fields that add up all the amounts like we did in those examples, add up the uses, add up the sources, and those are in the spreadsheet, and slide 22 has the list of those fields. All right. So after the grantee surveys are due and submitted, we do a process where we check through them. We look at the consistency of the data. We look at your notes to make sure we understand it, and we look at your report compared to some of your other reports. Once we do those checks, we reach out with any questions we have, and appreciate your responsiveness and helping us to understand the report. All right, now we're going to turn to Melissa for some final reminders.
All right, we're going to zip through some of these. As Dan mentioned, there have been some updates to Module 1, although these are really limited, and they're due to the release of the new infrastructure funding. The main changes are you must separately report on the uses of LIHEAP Infrastructure Acts during FY 2022. Grant recipients will not report on the uses of CARES funds in FY 2022 because all funds had to be returned to HHS at the end of FY 2021 if they weren't already obligated. Next slide. So OCS is anticipating that the FY 2022 performance data form will be submitted using Basecamp and Excel, similar to the prior report. And HHS will be providing each state with a customized Excel spreadsheet with pre-populated funding data in the coming week. You'll want to not only use the spreadsheet for submitting the final report, but it's very important that you check those pre-populated numbers against your own records. There have been errors in the past, and these can really affect your reporting and potentially other states, as we found. So check those as soon as you get it from HHS, make sure the numbers match up with your own records. Right now, the current due date is January 31st, as was announced in a prior communication, and we expect to see additional communication from OCS soon. These are Grantee Survey resources that you can go look at. I encourage you to take a look at the required reports support page on the performance management website. There's actually a place you can click on the Grantee Survey in particular, and it gives you a plethora of resources and instructions about it. We have a validation document that's helpful for checking before you submit, and then additional instructions, poverty guidelines, and past year's data links are all here. As Dan mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this is part of a larger performance data form, and module 2 of this are the performance measures, and those are also due with the Grantee Survey. We will have training for the performance measures, and similar to this set of trainings, we'll have 2 identical trainings, one in December and one in January. That way you can either sit through both, or you can invite staff potentially to sit through the second or the first, or we're just trying to offer people options. The first one will be next week, December 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and the link to register is here. Just a reminder, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but take a look at this if you're not already thinking about it. In order to report on your Module 2 performance measures, you're going to need to be collecting annual expenditure data from your vendors. And so this outlines the steps just the overarching steps you need to take. If you're not already reaching out, you should be. And if you have no clue what I'm talking about and need some assistance, please give us a call and we'll walk you through it to get you started. And now let's take another poll. So how helpful was this webinar in understanding what is needed to complete the FY 2022 Grantee Survey? The options are not at all helpful, not too helpful, somewhat helpful, and very helpful. Nicholas, I'll leave it to you to close the poll and tell us the results. Great. So this is really good for us to understand, and of course we always welcome feedback. So if you have some that you'd like to provide us that would make this more helpful for you or your peers, that would be really great. I can't underscore this enough, having been a past coordinator. I know some of you've heard me say it a gazillion times, so forgive me if it's one more, but do not spend time I always say banging your head against the cubicle wall. If you are running into an issue or you have a question, please just reach out to us. Even if it seems basic or simple or huge, don't spend a lot of time kind of going in circles on something. We've helped a lot of grantees. We've done this report many times for many years. We understand it's not a perfect report, and so it can be tricky to figure out where to put certain things. Give us a call and we are happy to walk you through that or help out. I'm going to turn it over to Nick for questions. We encouraged you to ask as we go, so he'll highlight anything we heard, but if you have one now, you can also go ahead and type it in the box, and this is the instructions for how to do that. Nicholas?
Thanks, Melissa. Yes, so one of the first questions we got, can you explain again how we should approach calculating the average benefits?
Yes. Dan, you'll step in and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to want to sum all of the benefits that you gave across a certain type. So let's take heating as an example. For your heating assistance component, you're going to add all of the benefits that you gave out in heating assistance and divide it by the number of unduplicated households that received heating assistance. Dan, is that correct?
Yeah. You ideally, especially if you obligated a large amount of funds, but you're expending them out over time, you want to look into the program records on who actually, how many households got this benefit in the fiscal year and what benefit amounts did they get, and calculate the mean with that information is the way to get the most accurate information to report.
That's a really good point. So what Dan, if you didn't hear what Dan said between the lines, you are not necessarily using that obligation amount to calculate the average benefit. You need to actually be going into your system and figure out what you gave for benefits in the fiscal year to calculate that number.
We did not separately track our uses of Infrastructure Act funds. How should we approach filling out this section?
Dan?
So first, remember that the infrastructure funds are a smaller amount of money that you all received, and many of you probably didn't use those funds for a separate new program component or something like that. So it partly depends on how you used them. If you know that you use them towards one or two assistance types, then it's pretty straightforward. If you kind of mingled them with your regular funds, well, then you can look at how much of your total funds that weren't ARPA went to heating assistance and how much went to cooling assistance and all the other components. And then you can look at what your total award amount was for your block grant funds compared to the infrastructure funds, and kind of do the math and report the right amounts. You know the total amount of each funding award you got, and you know how you used it. So there's definitely methods to help you if you're wondering, where do I get this number from, or how can I provide the right estimate? So we can help you with that as well.
One last question while we still have time. What if we're unable to submit the report by the deadline?
So if you're unable to submit the report by the deadline, first, HHS really wants to hear from you, your program specialist, if you need an extension, because that, first of all, it allows us to understand allows them to understand what's going on, and if you need assistance. And because the report is larger, they want to make sure that you have the right assistance for the right sections. I know that they will give extensions if they're needed, but it's also important to try to get the reports done to the best of your ability, so that they have the information to be able to use. So I'd reach out to your program specialist and talk about what the challenges are. Well, I think it looks like we've hit 3 o'clock. So if Nicholas, if there's more questions, maybe we can follow up with people about their questions. We thank you for your time today, and encourage you to invite others to attend if they couldn't make it today in January. And we'll see you for the performance measures webinar on Monday. Thank you very much. Anything else, Melissa?
Nope, thank you. Have a great day.
All right, thank you all.